Welcome to Hired in IT. Our mission is simple: help you build the skills that employers actually want. Whether you're trying to land your first IT job, switch careers, earn a promotion, or increase your salary, we're here to help. Every video is thoroughly researched and designed to make complex IT topics easy to understand. If there's an IT topic you'd like us to cover, leave a comment below. We may turn your suggestion into our next video. Turning IT knowledge into career opportunities. A help desk employee opens an invoice attachment because the sender name looks right. A PowerShell window flashes for half a second. The attacker's code may have executed, but execution is not the end of the story. To survive a restart, an attacker might try to create a persistence mechanism. That could mean adding a value to a registry run key, placing a shortcut or script in the startup folder, registering a service, or creating a scheduled task. Those are different mechanisms. What they have in common is the goal: make code run again after the user signs in or the system restarts. This is part 7 of the Job-Ready IT Roadmap. Earlier lessons focused on network exposure and attacks at the edge. Now we are inside Windows, where built-in security controls can prevent, detect, contain, or leave evidence of suspicious activity. The goal is not to memorize one tool. It is to understand which Windows control addresses which stage of an attack. By the end of this video, you will be able to do 3 things. First, open Windows Security and explain what its protection areas are designed to help with: malware protection, firewall and network protection, account and identity protection, reputation-based protection, and device security. Second, recognize several common Windows investigation locations: startup and persistence entries, NTFS permission settings, successful and failed logon events, and scheduled task details. Third, connect Windows security fundamentals to broader Microsoft security concepts such as identity, endpoint protection, defense in depth, least privilege, and monitoring. This video can support SC 900 preparation, but it is not an official exam map. SC 900 is a cloud-based security, compliance, and identity fundamentals exam with objectives that Microsoft updates over time. Always use the current Microsoft Learn Study Guide as the source of truth before scheduling the exam. Let's get hands-on. Press the Start key, type Windows Security, and open the application. Think of Windows Security as your local dashboard for several built-in protection areas. You'll see sections such as Virus and Threat Protection, Account Protection, Firewall and Network Protection, App and Browser Control, Device Security, and depending on your device and configuration, you may see additional security information. A green status generally means Windows Security isn't currently reporting an action you need to take in that protection area. But don't assume a green dashboard means the computer is perfectly secure. It means the controls Windows Security is monitoring aren't currently reporting a problem that requires your attention. Now open Virus and Threat Protection. Here you can review the status of Microsoft Defender Antivirus, check recent threats, access scan options, and review protection settings. If appropriate for your device, you can also run a quick scan. This dashboard is a useful starting point. But throughout this lesson, we're going to go deeper than green check marks. We're going to ask, what does each control actually protect? What attack path does it address? And what evidence should you investigate when something suspicious happens? Windows is widely deployed across business environments, which makes Windows endpoints valuable targets for attackers. Think about a company with hundreds or thousands of Windows laptops and desktops. Those systems may share operating system versions, applications, management tools, identity systems, and configuration patterns. A stolen credential, malicious document, vulnerable application, unsafe configuration, or other weakness may therefore create opportunities across more than one device. That's why Windows security isn't built around one antivirus product. Modern Windows uses multiple defensive layers. Microsoft Defender. Antivirus can help detect and block malware. Windows Defender Firewall controls network communication according to configured rules and profiles. SmartScreen and reputation-based protections can warn about certain suspicious applications, files, websites, and downloads. Account protections help reduce identity-related risk. BitLocker can help protect data stored on a lost or stolen device. Secure Boot and other device security capabilities can strengthen the startup and operating environment. Windows Update helps reduce exposure to known vulnerabilities, and enterprise environments may add endpoint detection and response, application control, centralized policy, identity protection, monitoring, and other security capabilities. This is defense in depth. The goal isn't to assume that one control will stop every attack. The goal is to create multiple opportunities to prevent, restrict, detect, investigate, or recover from malicious activity. Open Virus and Threat Protection, then select Manage Settings. Real-time protection scans files and processes as Windows encounters them. Cloud-delivered protection can use Microsoft's Cloud Intelligence to improve detection of suspicious or newly observed threats. Automatic sample submission can send certain suspicious samples to Microsoft for analysis, subject to the device's configuration and organizational policy. Controlled folder access is an optional ransomware protection feature. When it is configured, it can restrict untrusted or unapproved applications from changing files in protected folders. It does not make ransomware impossible, and it needs careful testing because legitimate applications can be blocked too. Tamper protection helps prevent unauthorized or unexpected changes to certain Microsoft Defender settings. Keep it enabled unless your organization has an approved management or troubleshooting reason to change it. These controls are layers, not guarantees. A well-protected Windows device also needs patching, least privilege, safe application practices, identity protection, logging, backups, and a response process. No single Windows feature stops every attack. A suspicious email attachment may encounter several layers. Microsoft Defender Antivirus can scan the file. SmartScreen and reputation-based protection can warn about unfamiliar or low-reputation apps and downloads. Attack surface reduction rules, where an organization has configured them, can limit risky behavior. Controlled folder access can help restrict unwanted changes to protected folders. A software vulnerability requires a different set of controls. Windows Update and vendor updates reduce known weaknesses. Exploit protection can help mitigate certain memory exploitation techniques. Endpoint detection and response can help identify suspicious behavior if prevention fails. A stolen password is an identity problem. Windows Hello can provide device-bound sign-in. Microsoft Entra MFA, phishing-resistant authentication methods, conditional access, password protection, and sign-in risk controls may all reduce the chance that a password alone becomes account takeover. Dynamic lock is useful for automatically locking a device when a paired phone moves away. but treat it as a convenience and physical security feature, not as a substitute for MFA or a primary identity control. The key lesson is to match the control to the attack path. Before we continue, let's clear up some Microsoft naming that confuses a lot of beginners. Windows Security is the local Windows application you're looking at. Think of it as a security dashboard. It brings together information and settings for several built-in protection areas, including antivirus, firewall, account protection, app and browser protection, and device security. Microsoft Defender. Antivirus is the built-in anti-malware capability. It can scan files and processes, use real-time protection, receive security intelligence updates, and use cloud-delivered protection when configured. So Windows Security and Microsoft Defender Antivirus are not exactly the same thing. Windows Security is the interface covering multiple security areas. Defender Antivirus is one of the security capabilities represented there. Now add a third term, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Defender for Endpoint is an enterprise endpoint security platform. Depending on licensing and configuration, it can add capabilities such as centralized device visibility, endpoint detection and response, vulnerability management features, investigation tools, threat hunting, attack surface reduction management, and broader security integration. Here's the easy way to remember it. Windows Security, Local Security Dashboard, Microsoft Defender Antivirus, Built-in Anti-Malware Protection, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Enterprise Endpoint Security, Detection, Investigation, and Response Capabilities. If you're preparing for an IT or cybersecurity interview, knowing those differences is much more useful than treating everything with Defender in the name as the same product. Quick recall check. A user receives a suspicious Word document containing malicious behavior. Which Windows protection areas might be relevant? Is it virus and threat protection plus app and browser control? Or firewall and network protection plus device security? The better answer is the first pair. Virus and threat protection includes anti-malware capabilities that may detect or block malicious files, content, or behavior. App and browser control includes reputation-based protections that can warn about or block certain unsafe applications, files, websites, and downloads. But here's the important part. Don't interpret that answer as these two controls will always stop a malicious document. Actual protection depends on the attack, configuration, file behavior, security policies, and other controls in the environment. In an enterprise environment, Microsoft Office protections, attack surface reduction rules, endpoint detection and response, application control, email security, and identity controls may provide additional defensive layers. Remember the larger lesson. Match the control to the attack path, but never assume one control guarantees prevention. Now let's look at Windows Defender Firewall. The beginner mental model is straightforward. Windows Defender Firewall generally blocks inbound connections that aren't allowed by an applicable firewall rule. Outbound traffic is generally allowed unless an applicable policy or rule restricts it. But don't reduce that to inbound bad, outbound good. Firewall behavior depends on the active network profile, configured rules, organizational policy, application requirements, and the traffic being evaluated. Windows commonly works with three network profiles: domain, private, public. Different rules can apply depending on which profile is active. That's important because a laptop connected to an organization's managed network may have different exposure requirements than the same laptop connected to public Wi-Fi. Now open Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. Here you can inspect inbound rules and outbound rules in much more detail than the basic Windows security tile. Suppose an application needs to accept incoming connections. Instead of turning off the firewall, create or use a rule that permits only the traffic the application actually requires. Depending on the situation, that could mean limiting the rule by application, protocol, port, network profile, source, or other available conditions. That's least privilege applied to network communication. Allow what the application needs. Don't open more than necessary. Let's see what that looks like from the simpler Windows Security interface. Open Windows Security, select Firewall and Network Protection. Then choose Allow an app through Firewall. Select Change Settings if you are authorized to make changes. Now find the application you need. You'll normally see options associated with network profiles, such as private and public. Here's the important rule. Enable the application only on the network profiles where inbound access is actually required. Don't automatically check every box just because an application asks for network access. Public networks generally deserve more restrictive treatment because you're less likely to control or trust the other devices connected to them. But even on a private or organizational network, don't create access the application doesn't need. And if you're managing an enterprise device, don't change firewall rules simply because a tutorial tells you to. The organization may manage those rules centrally through group policy, Intune, another endpoint management platform, or security policy. Every firewall exception changes the device's network exposure. So before creating one, ask, what application needs the connection? Why does it need inbound access? Which network profiles require it? Can the scope be restricted further? And, is this change authorized? That's a much better security habit than simply clicking Allow. Imagine a laptop is stolen. The protection you need depends on whether the device is powered off, locked, signed in, encrypted, managed, and connected to organizational identities. Windows. Hello can use a face, fingerprint, or PIN to sign in to the device. The Windows. Hello PIN is designed to be device-bound and does not roam like a reusable password. A stolen password from another breach is therefore not automatically enough to reproduce that local sign-in method on a different device. A security key can provide strong phishing-resistant authentication for supported services. It is particularly useful when an organization wants to reduce the risk of password-based sign-in attacks. Dynamic Lock can use a paired Bluetooth device to lock a PC when the user walks away. It can reduce the risk of an unattended, unlocked screen, but it is not guaranteed to react instantly and should not replace manually locking the device. Use the right combination for the situation. Screen lock and device encryption for physical loss, strong authentication for account access, least privilege for what an account can do, and monitoring for suspicious sign-in or endpoint behavior. Now let's look at another defensive layer: Microsoft Defender SmartScreen and reputation-based protection. SmartScreen can provide reputation-based warnings or protections when Windows encounters certain unfamiliar or potentially unsafe applications, files, websites, or downloads. For example, when you attempt to run an unfamiliar downloaded application, Windows may display a warning that the application isn't commonly downloaded or that its publisher can't be verified. That warning creates intentional friction. Instead of automatically running the file, The user gets a chance to stop and ask, "Do I know where this came from? Was I expecting this file? Is the publisher trustworthy? Does my organization approve this software?" In app and browser control, reputation-based protection settings can help protect against potentially malicious or unwanted applications, files, websites, and downloads, depending on the Windows version and configuration. But remember the defense in-depth lesson. SmartScreen is not your final security boundary. A file may also encounter antivirus scanning, browser protections, email security controls, application control, attack surface reduction rules, endpoint detection and response, and other defenses. The important user behavior is simple. Don't treat Run Anyway as the normal next button. A security warning is a reason to validate the file before overriding the protection. Windows device security uses several related but distinct protections. BitLocker encrypts a drive so that data on the drive is unreadable without the required key material or recovery information. A Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, can help protect BitLocker key material and can release it only when the boot environment matches expected measurements. That makes certain offline attacks and unauthorized boot changes more difficult. BitLocker can also be configured without a TPM, although the available startup authentication and integrity verification options differ. Some organizations use TPM-only protection. Others require additional startup authentication such as a PIN, according to policy and risk. Secure Boot helps prevent unauthorized bootloaders and early boot components from loading. It supports a trusted startup process, but it is not simply a required switch that makes BitLocker work. Virtualization-based security, core isolation, and memory integrity features are separate protections that can help defend Windows from certain kernel and credential attacks when hardware and configurations support them. These controls complement one another. Do not treat them as a single chain where disabling one feature means all drive encryption has failed. The operational rule is simple. Enable the protections your device and organization support, keep recovery information in an approved safe location, and test the recovery process before you need it during an emergency. Quick checkpoint. A laptop is lost during travel. Which Windows feature primarily helps protect the data stored on the device if someone removes the drive or tries to access it offline? BitLocker Drive Encryption. Now a second question. Which feature primarily controls whether network traffic is allowed to reach an application on the device? Windows Defender Firewall. The two controls solve different problems. BitLocker protects stored data from unauthorized offline access. The firewall controls network communication paths. A well-secure device uses both, alongside account protection, updates, endpoint protection, and safe configuration. Before enabling BitLocker, check which Windows Edition and encryption options your device supports. Some devices offer device encryption through settings, while others expose BitLocker management through Control Panel or organizational tools such as Intune. Before you turn on encryption, decide where the recovery information will be stored. For a personal device, that may be a Microsoft account or another secure location you control. For an organization-managed device, recovery information may need to be escrowed in Microsoft Entra ID, Active Directory, Intune, or another approved management system. Do not store the only recovery key on the same encrypted device. Then follow your organization's policy or the Windows setup flow to enable encryption. Depending on the device and policy, Windows may use TPM-backed protection, may require a startup PIN, or may offer other protector options. During setup, confirm that the recovery information has been saved successfully. Record where it is stored. If you are in a lab, test that you can locate the recovery information without exposing it in screenshots, notes, or public documentation. BitLocker is designed so that encrypted data cannot be recovered without the required authentication or recovery information. That is the protection you want against theft. But it also means recovery key management is part of the security control, not an optional afterthought. Patching closes known weaknesses, but security updates are not the only defense against ransomware or compromise. Enable automatic updates where appropriate. Set active hours and maintenance windows so reboots are planned rather than surprising. Keep a process for reviewing important updates, vendor advisories, and known exploited vulnerabilities. For a personal device, avoid leaving updates paused indefinitely. For a business environment, test significant changes where needed. Deploy them in stages and have a documented response path for urgent security issues. Also, patch more than Windows itself. Browsers, Office applications, device drivers, firmware, remote access tools, and third-party software can all create risk if they are outdated. The goal is not to install every change blindly. The goal is to maintain a disciplined process that reduces exposure to known vulnerabilities while protecting availability and business operations. Remember that help desk employee in the opening click? The malware launched. A PowerShell window flashed, and we assumed the story ended there. But here's the scary part. An attacker with a foothold often doesn't need custom malware at all. They can abuse built-in Windows administration tools to stay hidden for months. Next, we're going to look at 3 of the most common persistence mechanisms: registry run keys, services, and scheduled tasks, the same way a defender or SOC analyst would check for them. Windows has many legitimate startup locations, and a registry run key is only one of them. A run key value can cause a program to launch when a user signs in. That makes the location relevant during a persistence investigation, but an unfamiliar entry is not automatically malicious. As a defender, begin with context. What is the value name? What executable, script, or command does it launch? Where is that file stored? Is the publisher known? When was the entry created or modified? Does the same file appear in endpoint alerts, scheduled tasks, services, browser extensions, or user reports? For a broader and safer review, sysinternal's autoruns can show multiple auto-start locations in one view. Use it to inspect entries, verify publishers, compare paths against expected software, and document suspicious findings for escalation. Do not delete entries just because they look unfamiliar. First, validate the business purpose, collect evidence, and follow the organization's incident response or change management process. Right-click a folder, open Properties, and select the Security tab. This is where NTFS permissions control who can read, modify, delete, or change permissions on files and folders. Avoid relying on one slogan such as "deny always wins." Permission evaluation can involve explicit permissions, inherited permissions, group memberships, ownership, special permissions, and, when the folder is accessed over a network, share permissions as well. A useful beginner model is this. First, identify the user and every group that applies to that user. Then, review both explicit and inherited permissions. Then use the effective access or comparable review tools to test what the user can actually do. An explicit deny generally takes precedence. But broad deny permissions can create troubleshooting problems and should be used carefully. The common mistake is granting overly broad access, such as allowing every authenticated user to modify a sensitive shared folder simply to make a workflow work. Instead, grant the minimum rights needed for the business task. A user who only reads documents should not automatically be able to modify or delete them. A team that edits a folder may need modify rights. Administrative control should be limited to the appropriate owners and support roles. Least privilege is not about removing every broad group by default. It is about understanding who needs access, why they need it, and what they must be able to do. Quick checkpoint. A user finds a startup entry that launches an unfamiliar script at sign-in. Is the startup entry itself automatically proof of an attacker? No. It is evidence that needs context. Many legitimate applications use startup locations. Now identify the terms. A suspicious or unauthorized script that may run at sign-in could be part of a threat scenario. A startup location that allows code to launch automatically can be a persistence opportunity that an attacker might abuse. The investigation question is, who created the entry? What does it execute? Where is the file stored? And does the behavior match expected software? Defenders do not declare compromise from one artifact. They collect and correlate evidence. Here is the mistake that causes real damage on shared folders, granting more access than a user's job requires. If a broad group has modify or full control on a finance folder, a compromised account in that group may be able to rename, change, delete, or encrypt files in that folder. Least privilege reduces that blast radius. Users who only need to view reports may need read access. Users who create and edit working documents may need modify access in a specific working area. Folder owners and authorized administrators may need broader control, but that access should be limited, reviewed, and protected with stronger identity controls. Remember that ransomware impact depends on the permissions available to the compromised identity. A user with read-only access may still expose data through theft. A user with modify access may also be able to disrupt or encrypt data. No permission model is a complete ransomware defense by itself. Pair least privilege with backups, monitoring, endpoint protection, segmentation, and a recovery plan. Event Viewer can help you investigate Windows Logon activity, but a single event does not identify a person or prove an attack. Open Event Viewer, then go to Windows Logs and Security. Event ID 4624 commonly records a successful logon. Event ID 4625 commonly records a failed logon, if the appropriate audit policies are enabled and the event is retained. Open an event and review the details carefully. Which account was involved? What was the logon type? Which workstation or source address was recorded? What time did it occur? What process, authentication package, or target system appears in the event? Logon Type 2 is commonly associated with an interactive console logon. Logon Type 10 commonly indicates remote interactive activity, such as remote desktop. But always validate the meaning against current Microsoft documentation and the surrounding system context. A successful Type 10 event at an unusual time from an unfamiliar source may justify investigation. It is not automatically proof of an attacker. Correlate it with VPN records, Entra sign-ins, endpoint telemetry, change tickets, approved remote support activity, and the user's normal working pattern. The analyst's skill is to move from an event to a defensible conclusion, not to treat one field as a complete case. When a security log contains many failed logons, filtering can help you organize the evidence. You can filter Event ID 4625 events by time range, account, workstation, or other available fields. But treat the results as leads, not verdicts. Repeated failures from one source may come from password spraying. They may also come from a forgotten password in a scheduled task, an outdated saved credential, a misconfigured service, a VPN issue, a remote management system, or an ordinary user mistake. A stronger investigation asks, are multiple accounts affected? Do the failures share a source address, device, process, user agent, or time pattern? Did any login eventually succeed? Does the source match a known VPN, application, remote support service, or approved administrator? Are there related alerts in Microsoft Entra, Endpoint security tools, Firewall logs, or VPN logs? Use PowerShell or Event Viewer to reduce the number of events you must review, but protect the log data, follow authorized retention procedures, and avoid exposing usernames, IP addresses, or sensitive event details in public screenshots. The point is not to find a scary number. It is to develop a repeatable triage process that distinguishes normal noise from activity requiring escalation. Scheduled tasks are legitimate Windows automation features. Administrators and applications use them for updates, maintenance, backups, monitoring, and many other normal tasks. They can also be abused for persistence, so defenders should know how to review them. Open Task Scheduler and inspect a task's details. What is the task name and description? Who created it, or which account runs it? What trigger starts it? What program, script, or command is configured as the action? Where is the action file stored? Does the publisher, path, command line argument, and creation time match known software or a documented business purpose? Be cautious with names that merely sound like Microsoft components. A familiar-looking name is not proof that a task is legitimate, and an unfamiliar name is not proof that it is malicious. Do not create imitation update tasks, persistence tasks, or payload launching tasks as part of a general lesson. Use a pre-built isolated training dataset or a clearly benign task created under approved lab guidance if you need a visual demonstration. The defender's job is to validate the evidence, preserve context, and escalate suspicious tasks through the organization's incident process. After a compromise, an attacker may try to remain present across logons or restarts. This goal is called persistence. 3 Windows locations are often relevant during a persistence review. Registry Run Keys can launch programs when a user signs in. Windows services can run background processes. Their privilege level depends on the service configuration, account, permissions, and system design. Do not assume every service runs as system. Scheduled tasks can start programs or scripts based on triggers such as time, system startup, or user sign-in. Defenders may review these locations when investigating suspicious activity, but no single location tells the full story. Legitimate software can use all 3. A disciplined workflow is to identify the artifact, record the name and path, verify the signer or publisher where possible, inspect the creation and modification history, compare it with approved software, and correlate it with endpoint alerts, user reports, process activity, network connections, and change records. If a device has an unfamiliar run key value, a suspicious service, and an unexplained scheduled task that all point to the same file or account, that may strengthen the case for escalation. It is still the correlation, not one artifact alone, that makes the finding meaningful. Quick checkpoint. You find two things on a Windows device. First, several failed logons appear in the security log from the same source. Second, a scheduled task launches a script from an unfamiliar user-writable folder. Which finding proves compromise by itself? Neither one. The failed logons are a signal that needs context. The task is an artifact that needs validation. What should you do next? Collect details safely. Review account, time, source, logon type, task action, file path, publisher, creation history, endpoint alerts, and approved change records. Then correlate the evidence and follow the incident response process if the activity is suspicious. That is how a defender turns separate clues into a reasoned conclusion. PowerShell is a legitimate Windows administration tool. Defenders should understand both how it is managed and why execution policy alone is not a security boundary. Execution policy can help reduce accidental script execution and can communicate how an environment expects scripts to be handled. For example, a remote signed policy can require downloaded scripts to be signed while allowing local scripts to run. But an attacker or an administrator with sufficient privileges may be able to change, bypass, or work around execution policy settings. That means execution policy is an administrative safety feature, not your primary malware defense. For stronger protection, organizations may use application control, attack surface reduction rules, least privilege, code signing practices, endpoint protection, and carefully managed administrative access. For visibility, PowerShell logging features such as script block logging can record useful script content when they are enabled and properly collected. Logging should be configured through approved policy, protected from tampering, forwarded or retained according to the organization's requirements, and reviewed with other endpoint evidence. Script block logging can provide valuable insight into suspicious PowerShell activity. It does not replace prevention, and it does not remove the need to validate the surrounding context. The lesson is simple: manage execution, limit privileges, collect evidence, and investigate behavior, not just a single setting. Configuring one Windows machine manually is manageable. Configuring hundreds requires centralized policy and careful testing. On supported standalone Windows editions, local group policy can help administrators manage local settings. In an Active Directory environment, group policy can apply domain policies to selected users and devices. In cloud-managed environments, Intune can deploy endpoint security policies and security baselines. Microsoft security baselines provide recommended groups of settings, but they are not a one-click substitute for understanding your environment. Review each baseline, test it with representative devices, watch for application or accessibility impacts, and deploy it in stages. Account lockout, password requirements, UAC settings, audit policies, PowerShell settings, service controls, firewall rules, and endpoint protections should all reflect the organization's risk tolerance and operational needs. For example, a short lockout threshold can slow password attacks, but it can also create support burden or be abused to lock out legitimate users. Use a policy that fits the environment and pair it with MFA, password protection, monitoring, and incident response. Centralized policy is powerful because it creates consistency. Use that power carefully, test changes before broad deployment, and monitor whether devices actually comply with the intended configuration. If you're studying for SC 900, Treat this video as a practical Windows security lesson, not as an official exam blueprint. SC900 covers broader Microsoft security, compliance, and identity concepts than the controls on one Windows computer. But several Windows features can make those larger concepts easier to understand. Windows Hello can help you understand stronger, device-bound authentication. BitLocker demonstrates encryption and data protection. Microsoft Defender Antivirus demonstrates endpoint malware protection. Windows Defender Firewall demonstrates network filtering and defense in depth. Event Viewer helps introduce security monitoring and investigation. Least privilege file permissions demonstrate authorization. And Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can help you understand how enterprise security platforms extend protection, detection, investigation, and response across many devices. But SC900 goes beyond Windows. You'll also encounter concepts involving Microsoft Entra, Azure Security, the Microsoft Defender ecosystem, Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft Purview, compliance, governance, and identity. Exam objectives can change. So before scheduling the certification, always use the current Microsoft Learn SC900 study guide as your source of truth. Use this video for something different. Building practical intuition. Don't memorize BitLocker equals encryption. Understand, what information does BitLocker protect, against which type of access, and what does recovery key management have to do with that protection? That's the kind of understanding that helps both on an exam and in a real IT job. Here are 7 practical hardening areas to review this week. Use strong, phishing-resistant authentication where your accounts and organization support it. MFA is particularly important for remote access, administrative actions, and sensitive services. Use a standard account for daily work. Reserve administrator access for approved administrative tasks. Confirm that device encryption is enabled where supported, and verify that recovery information is stored safely and can be retrieved through an approved process. Keep Windows, browsers, Office applications, drivers, firmware, and other software updated through a risk-based patch process. Review file and folder permissions. Grant users and groups the minimum access they need, and verify effective access instead of relying on assumptions. Review firewall and remote access exposure. Disable unnecessary services and restrict management access to approved paths. And if your environment uses segmentation, remember that VLAN labels alone are not enough. Control traffic between segments with routing rules, access control lists, firewalls, and identity-aware access policies. Pick 3 areas that fit your own device, home lab, or authorized environment. Document what you changed, why you changed it, and how you verified that normal work still functions. Windows Security is the local Windows interface for several built-in protections, including Microsoft Defender Antivirus, firewall settings, account protection, app and browser controls, and device security information. For a personal device, home lab, or small environment, those built-in controls provide a valuable security foundation. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is an enterprise endpoint security service. It builds on endpoint protections such as Defender Antivirus, but it is not merely the same antivirus engine in a central console. Depending on licensing and configuration, Defender for Endpoint can provide centralized device visibility, endpoint detection and response, vulnerability management capabilities, attack surface reduction policy, investigation tools, incident context, threat hunting, and integrations with the broader Microsoft Defender platform. For a SOC role, it is useful to understand both levels. Understand the local Windows controls that protect a device. Then understand how enterprise tools collect signals across many devices, correlate activity, and support investigation and response. You do not need to claim that every Defender product is available everywhere. Learn the capabilities, the licensing dependencies, and the operational workflow used in the environment you are discussing. Final security checkpoint. A standard user receives a phishing message. The attacker successfully gains access to that user's account. Now the attacker attempts to use the compromised identity to encrypt files in a finance share. Which controls could reduce the impact of this attack path? Pause and think of at least two. One strong answer is least privilege file permissions. If the compromised account only has access to the files required for that user's job, the attacker's reach may be smaller. And if the account doesn't have modify access to a sensitive finance location, the attacker may have less ability to change, delete, or encrypt those files through that identity. A second strong answer is tested backups and recovery controls. If files are damaged, despite preventive controls, reliable backups and a tested recovery process can reduce the business impact. But those aren't the only defenses. Phishing-resistant authentication could make the original account takeover harder. Endpoint protection and EDR could detect or interrupt suspicious behavior. Application controls could restrict unauthorized execution. Network segmentation, enforced through routing and firewall policy, could restrict movement. Monitoring could help defenders detect suspicious activity sooner. The point isn't to find one magic security product. Think about the attack as a path. Then ask, which control could prevent this stage? Which control could detect it? Which control could contain it? And which control helps us recover if prevention fails? That's defense in depth. Let's tie the whole video together with 3 takeaways. First, Windows security is not one antivirus toggle. It is a layered set of controls that includes malware protection, firewall and network controls, account and identity protection, reputation-based protection, device encryption, secure startup features, patching, permissions, logging, and policy management. Second, persistence investigation is evidence-driven. Registry run keys, services, and scheduled tasks can all be legitimate. Review the artifact, file path, signer, account, timing, business purpose, and related endpoint evidence before deciding whether it is suspicious. Third, effective Windows. Hardening is not a checklist you apply blindly. Use least privilege, safe recovery key management, risk-based patching, controlled remote access, centralized policy where appropriate, logging, monitoring, tested backups, and a response process that fits the device and organization. A certification can help organize study, and hands-on practice can build confidence. But what makes you useful in a security role is the ability to connect a control, an alert, or a configuration to the risk it actually addresses. Next up in this Job Ready series, Linux Security Fundamentals. If Windows is your primary operating system, Linux can feel very different at first. But the security principles you've learned here still apply. You'll learn how Linux file permissions use: read, write, execute. We'll break down users, groups, ownership, and commands, such as chmod and chown. You'll learn why root access is powerful, why sudo matters, and why least privilege is just as important on Linux as it is on Windows. We'll look at SSH and the controls administrators use to secure remote access, and we'll investigate Linux logs. Instead of relying on Windows Event Viewer, Linux environments may use traditional log files under locations such as log, along with the system journal and tools such as journal.ctl. You'll learn how to move from something looks strange to here's the evidence, here's the context, and here's why this deserves investigation. If you're preparing for a help desk, system administration, cloud, or SOC role, Linux is an important next foundation. That's where we're going next. Before you leave, here are 4 resources worth bookmarking. First, Microsoft Learn. If you're studying for SC 900, use Microsoft's current study guide and official training as your primary certification source. Second, Microsoft's Windows security documentation. Use it when you want to go deeper into BitLocker, Windows Defender Firewall, Microsoft Defender Antivirus, Windows Hello, audit policies, and other built-in security features. Third, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint documentation. This is where you can start moving from single-device security into enterprise endpoint detection, investigation, response, and centralized security operations. And fourth, Microsoft sysinternals. Tools such as autoruns can help defenders inspect startup and persistence locations in a Windows lab or authorized environment. You don't need 20 resources. Start with the official documentation. Pick one Windows security control from today's lesson. Learn how Microsoft says it works. Test it safely on a device or lab you're authorized to manage. Then document. What does this control protect? What doesn't it protect? How would I verify that it's working? That's a much better learning strategy than memorizing a list of security settings. Your first hardening task should be concrete, safe, and reversible. Start with a device you own or are explicitly authorized to administer. Open Windows Security and confirm that Microsoft Defender, Antivirus, and Tamper Protection are enabled according to your organization's policy. Review whether device encryption or BitLocker is available and already enabled. Before turning on encryption, identify where the recovery information will be stored and verify that you can retrieve it through an approved method. Do not proceed until that recovery plan is clear. Run a quick scan if it is appropriate for the device. Then open Event Viewer and review recent failed logons. A group of Event ID 4625 records means failed authentication occurred. It does not by itself prove an attack. If you see repeated failures, ask what accounts were involved, where the events came from, whether a scheduled task or saved credential could explain them, whether any login later succeeded, and whether other logs provide context. Document what you found without exposing usernames, IP addresses, recovery keys, device identifiers, or sensitive event data publicly. That is a real hardening and investigation habit. Make one controlled improvement, verify it safely, and interpret evidence before drawing a conclusion. Remember, careers aren't built by watching videos. They're built by applying what you learn. Pick one thing from today's lesson, build it, document it, and share it. That's how you get hired. Thanks for watching Hired in IT, where we're turning IT knowledge into career opportunities.